There was a man who dedicated nearly a decade of his life not to fighting crime, not to protecting the innocent, but to destroying Michael Jackson. His name was Tom Sneddon, and he was the most powerful law enforcement official in Santa Barbara County, California. He had the resources of the state, the loyalty of a police department, and an obsession that colleagues, jurors, and legal scholars would later describe as something closer to a vendetta than a prosecution. What happened between these two men did not begin with a courtroom. It did not begin with a camera crew or a tell-all interview. It began in 1993 with a set of allegations that were never proven, a humiliation that Sneddon never forgot, and a decision by one district attorney to make it his personal mission to finish what he had started, no matter the cost, no matter the evidence, and no matter how many years it took. By the time it was over, Michael Jackson would never be the same again. What most people don't know is just how far Sneddon was willing to go, and what he did behind closed doors that the jury never got to hear.
The allegations of child molestation, 288A of the California Penal Code.
And I will not be a silent collaborator of his crimes.
Were you ever accused of having sexually molested Grant Barnes?
Answer that.
The man with a badge and a grudge. Long before Michael Jackson ever appeared in a Santa Barbara courtroom, Tom Sneddon had already built himself a reputation as a man who did not lose. Born in 1941 and raised in a devout Catholic family in Los Angeles, Sneddon had spent his career climbing the ladder of California law enforcement with a single-minded focus that earned him both admirers and enemies in equal measure. By 1983, he had been elected District Attorney of Santa Barbara County, a position he would hold almost uninterrupted for over 2 decades. He was not a flashy prosecutor. He was methodical, determined, and deeply convinced of his own moral authority. To those who worked with him, he was a professional. To those who crossed him, he was immovable. Sneddon's jurisdiction covered a stretch of California coastline that included, among other things, a 2,700-acre property in Los Olivos called Neverland Ranch. Michael Jackson had purchased Neverland in 1988 for approximately $17 million, a sprawling fantasy estate complete with a private zoo, a cinema, a fairground, and a staff of dozens. It was, in every sense, a kingdom built for one man's vision of the world. And it sat directly inside Tom Sneddon's territory. For years, the two men existed in parallel, one, the undisputed king of pop, the other, the undisputed authority of the county. Then, in the summer of 1993, those two worlds collided in a way that would set the next 12 years of both their lives on a course neither could have predicted. The 1993 accusation that started everything. In August 1993, Evan Chandler, a dentist from Los Angeles, made a formal accusation against Michael Jackson to the Los Angeles Police Department, alleging that Jackson had sexually abused his 13-year-old son, Jordan. The claim ignited a media firestorm unlike anything the entertainment world had seen. Within days, police departments in both Los Angeles and Santa Barbara had launched simultaneous investigations. Tom Sneddon led the Santa Barbara side personally. This was not a case he delegated. The investigation was aggressive from the start. Sneddon's team raided Neverland Ranch in August 1993, removing hundreds of items, including photographs, videos, and personal documents. Jackson, who was in the middle of his Dangerous World Tour at the time, a tour that had already sold out stadiums across Europe and Asia, was subjected to one of the most degrading episodes of his entire life. In December 1993, under a court-ordered warrant obtained by Sneddon's office, Jackson was forced to submit to a strip search and physical examination. The procedure was conducted to compare Jackson's body, specifically a reported skin condition, against Jordan Chandler's description. Jackson's attorneys were present. Photographs were taken. Jackson himself later described the experience as one of the most traumatic moments he had ever endured, telling friends it left him feeling violated in a way he could not find the words to describe. And then, after all of it, the raid, the search, the global media exposure, the criminal case collapsed. Jordan Chandler's family accepted a civil settlement from Jackson, reportedly totaling $23 million. With the civil matter resolved and the key accuser unwilling to testify in a criminal trial, Sneddon had no case. In September 1994, the investigation was formally suspended. No charges were ever filed. Most prosecutors would have moved on. Tom Sneddon did not. The files he never closed. For the next 9 years, while Michael Jackson rebuilt his public image, releasing History in 1995, marrying Lisa Marie Presley, then Debbie Rowe, fathering 3 children, and battling Sony Music in a war over his own masters, Tom Sneddon kept a file open in Santa Barbara. He did not speak publicly about Jackson with any regularity. He did not need to. He was patient in a way that, in hindsight, should have alarmed everyone around Jackson far sooner than it did. In November 2002, journalist Martin Bashir approached Jackson's team with a proposal: an intimate fly-on-the-wall documentary that would allow Jackson to tell his own story in his own words. Jackson, who had spent nearly a decade being defined by tabloid headlines rather than his music, agreed. What followed was 8 months of filming that would produce a documentary called Living with Michael Jackson, broadcast by ITV in the United Kingdom and ABC in the United States in February 2003. The documentary contained a moment that changed everything. In one sequence, Jackson sat beside a 13-year-old boy named Gavin Arvizo, a cancer survivor whom Jackson had befriended after Gavin's mother contacted the star during her son's illness. In the footage, Jackson held Gavin's hand and spoke almost casually about how he shared his bedroom with children, describing it as a loving and entirely innocent act. To Jackson, it was a statement of warmth. To the rest of the world, and to one district attorney watching in Santa Barbara, it was something else entirely. Tom Sneddon had his opening, and this time he was not going to let it close. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. This story is one of many we've covered that the mainstream never tells in full. The arrest that shook the world. On November 18, 2003, 70 police officers descended on Neverland Ranch in what Sneddon's office described as a search operation. They were looking for evidence to support charges of child sexual abuse involving Gavin Arvizo. The raid lasted 14 hours. Officers removed computers, DVDs, photographs, books, and personal items by the boxload. They photographed rooms, catalogued contents, and swept the estate with a thoroughness that even at the time struck some legal observers as disproportionate for a case still in its investigative phase. On November 20, 2003, just 2 days after the Neverland raid, an arrest warrant was issued for Michael Jackson. Jackson was in Las Vegas at the time, having just completed filming a music video. He was given the option to surrender himself voluntarily. He flew to Santa Barbara, walked into the sheriff's department, and was booked on multiple counts of child molestation. He was handcuffed. He was fingerprinted. He was photographed. The image of Michael Jackson, the most famous entertainer on earth, standing in a booking photograph with his hands clasped in front of him, circled the globe within hours. Tom Sneddon stood in front of cameras that afternoon, and in a moment that raised eyebrows even among those sympathetic to the prosecution, made a joke. When a reporter asked whether Jackson had cooperated, Sneddon smirked and said he was glad Jackson had finally made it back to Santa Barbara, adding a quip about Jackson's travel schedule. It was not the language of a detached public servant. It was the language of a man who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The charges eventually filed against Jackson included 4 counts of lewd acts upon a child, 1 count of attempted lewd act, and 4 counts of administering an intoxicating agent, allegations that he had given Arvizo alcohol before the alleged abuse. Jackson pleaded not guilty on all counts. The trial was set for January 2005. What nobody outside Sneddon's office fully understood yet was just how flawed the case against Jackson actually was, and how far the prosecution would go to hide it. The lie Sneddon chose to ignore. The Arvizo family had a history that Sneddon's team was aware of long before the trial began, and which they chose, critics argued, to minimize rather than confront. Janet Arvizo, Gavin's mother, had previously filed a lawsuit against JCPenney, claiming that store security guards had assaulted her and her children during a shoplifting incident in 2001. That lawsuit resulted in a $152,000 settlement. Under oath during that case, Janet Arvizo had made statements about injuries and emotional distress that were later directly contradicted by other evidence. More damaging still was the timeline at the center of the prosecution's case. Sneddon's team alleged that the abuse of Gavin Arvizo had taken place at Neverland in February 2003. But the Arvizo family had given multiple interviews in the weeks immediately after the Bashir documentary aired in February and March 2003 in which they spoke glowingly of Jackson, describing him as kind, generous, and entirely appropriate with Gavin. One of those interviews was a taped statement made to a Jackson associate, in which Janet Arvizo herself praised Jackson and denied any wrongdoing. The defense argued that these statements made it virtually impossible for the alleged abuse to have occurred on the timeline Sneddon presented. The prosecution also alleged that Jackson had conspired to hold the Arvizo family at Neverland against their will, a charge of false imprisonment that seemed to many observers to stretch the limits of credibility, given that the family had been photographed freely coming and going from the estate on multiple occasions during the period in question. And yet Sneddon pressed forward. The machinery of the state, the investigators, the prosecutors, the resources of Santa Barbara County, was fully deployed in service of a case that the defense had already identified as built on a collapsing foundation. Jackson, meanwhile, was falling apart. Michael's reaction to the trial. The People vs. Michael Joseph Jackson began on January 31, 2005, in Department 1 of the Santa Barbara County Superior Court before Judge Rodney Melville. It would last 5 months. It would feature 90 witnesses, hundreds of exhibits, and a level of media coverage that transformed the small city of Santa Maria, where the courthouse was located, into a circus of satellite trucks, protesters, and camera crews from every major broadcaster on Earth. What was happening inside Michael Jackson during those 5 months was visible to anyone paying attention. He arrived late to court on multiple occasions, prompting Judge Melville to threaten him with arrest. On one morning in March 2005, Jackson arrived wearing pajama bottoms, an image that was interpreted variously as a deliberate act of defiance or a sign of deteriorating health. His weight dropped visibly over the course of the trial. His face, already a subject of intense public fascination for years, appeared drawn and exhausted in a way that went beyond mere stress. Those close to Jackson during this period described a man who was barely sleeping, consuming prescription medication at a rate that alarmed his inner circle, and who had developed a consuming terror of what a conviction would mean. Not just prison, though that fear was real and present, but the permanent destruction of everything he had built, his music, his legacy, his children. Jackson had 3 young children by this point: Michael Joseph Jackson Jr., known as Prince, born in 1997, Paris Michael Catherine Jackson, born in 1998, and Prince Michael Jackson II, later known as Blanket, born via surrogate in 2002. The thought of losing access to them, of being defined forever as a convicted predator in their eyes, was something Jackson's associates said he could barely bring himself to speak about. The trial dragged on through spring. The prosecution presented its witnesses. The defense dismantled them one by one. And through it all, Tom Sneddon sat at the prosecution table, methodical and unbending as he had always been. Subscribe to the channel if you want to keep seeing the stories the mainstream buries, because what happened next is something most people have never heard. The man who never apologized. On June 13, 2005, after 7 days of deliberation, the jury in the People vs. Michael Joseph Jackson returned their verdict. Not guilty on all 14 counts. Every single charge, the molestation, the attempted molestation, the conspiracy, the false imprisonment, and the alcohol charges, was dismissed by a jury of 12 Californians who had sat through 5 months of testimony and concluded that the prosecution had not proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. The reaction outside the courthouse was immediate and overwhelming. Fans who had camped on the sidewalks of Santa Maria for weeks erupted. Doves were released. Jackson's supporters wept. Inside the courtroom, Jackson himself sat motionless for a long moment before being embraced by his attorney, Thomas Mesereau, who had led one of the most methodical and devastating defense cases in recent California legal history. Tom Sneddon said nothing of consequence that day. He appeared briefly before cameras, accepted the verdict with the controlled expression of a man who had spent decades in courtrooms, and gave little indication of what the loss had cost him. He would retire as District Attorney of Santa Barbara County in January 2006, less than 7 months after the acquittal. He died in October 2014 at the age of 73, having never publicly acknowledged that the prosecution of Michael Jackson had been anything other than a proper exercise of his office. But the jury told a different story. Several jurors spoke to the media in the days following the verdict, and what they said was striking. Juror number 1, a woman named Ray Hultman, stated plainly that she believed the Arvizo family had lied on the stand. Another juror, Eleanor Cook, went further, telling a reporter that she felt the prosecution had been driven by something other than justice. The word multiple observers reached for then, and in the years since, was vendetta. What Sneddon had done, in the view of many legal scholars who later reviewed the case, was take a legitimate prosecutorial concern, the pattern of behavior Jackson exhibited with young boys, and channel it through a witness family whose credibility was fatally compromised from the beginning. He had prioritized his need to finally charge Michael Jackson over the fundamental requirement of any prosecution, a case that could actually be proven. The cost that couldn't be acquitted. Michael Jackson walked out of the Santa Barbara County Superior Court on June 13, 2005, a free man. He would never perform in the United States again. In the weeks after the verdict, Jackson left America and relocated to Bahrain, where he was a guest of Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamad Al Khalifa, the son of that country's king. He then moved to Ireland and later to Las Vegas. He was reclusive in a way that people who had known him for decades found alarming. Neverland Ranch, the estate he had bought for $17 million, the place he had described as his home, his sanctuary, and the embodiment of everything he had wanted childhood to feel like, was left largely empty. Jackson never lived there again after the trial. In 2008, the property went into default when Jackson failed to make payments on a $23.5 million loan. He had been, for the first time in his adult life, financially exposed in a way he could not immediately correct. The trial had cost him not just money, though the legal fees alone were estimated to have run into the tens of millions of dollars, but something harder to quantify. His relationship with the American public, already complicated by years of tabloid coverage, had been permanently altered. The image of him in those booking photographs, the pajamas in court, the frail figure arriving late day after day, these had laid themselves over the memory of the moonwalk, over Thriller, over the man who had once been the most celebrated entertainer in the world. His health was deteriorating in ways that were apparent to those around him, but not yet fully visible to the public. His dependency on prescription medication, particularly the anesthetic propofol, which he was using to sleep, had deepened dramatically during and after the trial. He was in pain physically and in every other sense, and he was, for the first time in his life, genuinely afraid of what the future held. In the spring of 2009, Jackson announced a series of 50 comeback concerts at the O2 Arena in London to be called This Is It. Tickets sold out in hours. The world, it seemed, was ready to receive him again. On June 25, 2009, less than 3 weeks before the first scheduled concert, Michael Jackson died at his rented home in Holmby Hills, Los Angeles. He was 50 years old. The cause of death was acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication administered by his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, who was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The man who had stood in that Santa Barbara courtroom, convinced beyond all reason that he could bring Michael Jackson down, had retired to private life. The man he had pursued across 12 years, 2 grand juries, and one of the most watched trials in American history was gone. And the medication that killed Michael Jackson was the same medication he had turned to during the years when sleeping had become impossible, years that began, in no small part, in the summer of 1993, when a district attorney in Santa Barbara decided that this case was personal. What his obsession actually cost. Tom Sneddon's prosecution of Michael Jackson is studied today in legal circles not as an example of the system working, but as a cautionary study in what happens when prosecutorial power becomes entangled with personal motivation. The American Bar Association's guidelines on prosecutorial ethics require that a district attorney charge a case only when there is sufficient evidence to support a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. Multiple legal analysts who have reviewed the Arvizo case in the years since the trial have concluded that Sneddon's office filed charges despite knowing that the Arvizo family's credibility problems were severe enough to make a conviction deeply unlikely. What drove him? The answer almost certainly lies in 1993. In that year, Sneddon had come closer than anyone to charging the most famous man in the world and had been denied his moment, not necessarily by a lack of evidence, but by the refusal of a key witness to cooperate with a criminal prosecution. For a man of Sneddon's temperament, for a man who had spent 20 years building a reputation as someone who did not walk away, that outcome was unacceptable. When Martin Bashir's documentary handed him a second opportunity a decade later, he took it with both hands, and in doing so arguably caused more damage to the course of justice than the man he was trying to convict. Michael Jackson's acquittal did not restore what had been taken from him. It did not give back the years of terror, the nights without sleep, or the physical collapse visible in every courtroom photograph. It did not rebuild Neverland or return the financial security that the legal battle had eroded. And it did not undo the dependency on medication that had taken root in the soil of those years and would ultimately end his life. What the verdict did do was confirm what many had suspected from the beginning, that the case against Michael Jackson in 2005 was not primarily about Gavin Arvizo. It was about 1993. It was about a strip search, a humiliation, and a case that slipped away. It was about a district attorney who had decided somewhere along the way that the pursuit of one man had become the defining purpose of his career. Tom Sneddon spent 12 years trying to make Michael Jackson's worst nightmare come true. In the end, the nightmare came true anyway, just not in the way either of them expected. And the courtroom that Sneddon had spent over a decade preparing for turned out not to be the place where Michael Jackson's story ended. That happened 4 years later in a bedroom in Holmby Hills, California, with a doctor and a drip, in a world that had no idea what was coming. The story of what was done to Michael Jackson in boardrooms, in courtrooms, and in the press is one this channel will keep telling. Make sure you're here for it.